Hello, my name's Corey, and this is my channel, Shifting Gears. Today, I made a list. I know this is a Yummy Noobs thing, but I don't think I'll be stealing any food off his table. He's not related to the Fine Brothers, is he? Anyways, here's the top 8 reasons the KTM 690 Enduro is the best dual sport of all time. Starting with number 8, the LC4 motor. A surprise even to me, the LC4 was first introduced all the way back in 1987. It was a liquid-cooled 4-stroke 553cc thumper. Since then, KTM has continued to refine the LC4 design into the absolute monster it is today. It's now a whopping 693 cc's and makes an incredible 67 horsepower, 73 in the current models, and 50 foot-pounds of torque. That's about as much or more than any twin with a similar displacement, and is in fact the most powerful single-cylinder engine in the world today. Number 7. It's a modern bike. The world of dual sports has been divided into mostly two halves for a while, modern and not so modern. With the KTM 690 being a modern bike, it comes with a lot of cool features. It has fuel injection, a great suspension, and as I mentioned in number 8, the LC4 engine is very refined and powerful for a single cylinder. It also comes with a 6-speed transmission. However, being a modern bike requires that it has to meet modern emission standards. This adds to both the cost and the weight. Not so modern bikes, on the other hand, get to skirt those regulations because they haven't been updated since the late 80s or thereabouts. But therein lies the problem. They haven't been updated for a very long time. They tend to be rather Spartan, not to mention you have to try and live with carburetors and 5-speed transmissions. Number 6. The clutch. Speaking of cool features, the 690 comes with a pneumatic clutch. What this means is that the clutch is not operated by pulling a cable, but is actuated by oil pressure in the line, which leads to a consistently light and smooth lever feel. You can operate the clutch easily with a single finger. This also means that your fingers won't get so tired with prolonged or heavy use. It's incredibly easy to stay in the friction zone as well. Number 5. The throttle. The next part on the list literally goes hand in hand with the pneumatic clutch, and that's the ride-by-wire throttle. Usually this is a feature only found on sport and road bikes, but KTM saw the potential for off-road use as well. Many of you will probably equate EFI systems with a jerky throttle. However, the ride-by-wire throttle on the KTM is able to alleviate this entirely. In its standard setting, the throttle on the 690 is buttery smooth, but the power doesn't fully come on until you reach higher RPMs. This is in part to help pass emissions, but will also help newer riders keep better control of the bike. It can also be nice if you want to simply go for a relaxing cruise. There's an advanced setting which gives you power through the whole rev range. It feels a lot like normal EFI bikes in that the throttle becomes much more abrupt. Number 4. The tank. The KTM 690 has a 3.2 gallon tank, 3.6 on the new models. And that may not seem like a lot, and you're right, it's not. And unlike your typical bike, the tank is actually a part of the subframe. This means you can't swap it out for a bigger one. The only options are rather expensive auxiliary tanks. It's typically a good amount more than what you'd find from the smaller dual sports as well. But in my experience, 3 to 4 gallons is about all I'd want. When you put massive tanks on these bikes, you just look like an ADV wannabe. Not to mention you'd be adding a lot of weight to an already fairly heavy bike. A range of 130 to 150 miles should be expected, but depends on what you're doing. If I really wanted to go for a long trip, then a Rotopax would be all I need. Number 3. OnRoad Capability. To be the greatest dual sport of all time means that this bike needs to be good both on and off the road. With a slightly wider rake and lower gearing, the 690 Enduro does quite well on the street. Again, all that horsepower doesn't hurt either. It can cruise along at 70 without breaking a sweat. You wouldn't want to ride many other dual sports for long at that speed. This is a bike that you can actually travel to the trails even if you don't live close to any. Number 2. Off-road Capability. At 340 pounds wet, the 690 Enduro is a hefty boy, much too big to be considered a dirt bike, but for a dual sport, it's actually right there with the rest of them. It's lighter than the old 650s and only about 20 pounds more than a DRZ 400. Smaller displacement Dualsports tip the scales in the high 200s to low 300s and are much more nimble, but when considering the whole package, the 690 doesn't give up much on the trails. It can go low and slow thanks to the clutch and throttle combo, as well as climb over decent obstacles. Honestly, the biggest factor here is rider skill and tire choice. And now we come to it. The number one reason the 690 Enduro is the best Dualsport ever made is that it does exactly what a Dualsport is supposed to do, better than any other Dualsport out there. It's truest to the name. I mean, think of any Dualsport and I can tell you quickly and simply why the 690 is better. The DRZ 400? It's old, underpowered, nearly weighs the same, but with half the horsepower. The DR and XR 650s, again, old, underpowered, and even heavier. CRF 450L? Undersprung, poorly tuned off-road racer. CRF or KLX 300? They're okay for trails, poor for highways, kinda slow. And the list goes on. I welcome your comments on this as well. I know the basic argument against the 690 is the high price and somewhat low availability. If you can't afford it, that sucks. But in all seriousness, neither of these things make it a worse bike. The extra money very closely matches the extra performance. At the end of the day, the 690 Enduro is kind of a unicorn. When every other manufacturer basically gave up on Dualsports, satisfied with selling unchanged and unimproved models for decades, KTM continued to push forward with modernization and new technology, keeping the Dualsport segment alive. Imagine how much better Dualsports could be if the Japanese brands had tried to compete. They've begun to make moves more recently, but they still have a long way to go to catch the 690, if that's even possible at this point. All in all, the segment has shifted towards modernization, which is good to see, but most newer bikes are extremely trail biased. Sure, they have the technical advantage of street legality, but what's the point if they're not even enjoyable on the street? How many people actually live close enough to trails that they'd ride their Dualsports to them? Before I found my 690, I was considering buying two different bikes, one for the trails and one for the street, because nothing in the segment was able to do both, or at least not up to my standards. My only hope was to find a 690, and as fate would have it, there was a nice used one for sale at a nearby dealership. I found my unicorn, and it's 100% worth it to get your hands on one for yourself.